The syringe trembled in May Arasaka's steady hand, a sight so unusual that she paused mid-injection to stare at her own fingers. 20 years of illegal medical practice in the Shimizu district's underground had given her hands of steel, yet here they were, betraying her with an involuntary quiver. The cause lay on her makeshift operating table. Koji Tanaka, a mid-level enforcer for the Crimson Serpent Gang, whose neural implant had begun sprouting metallic tendrils that pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist in the visible spectrum. The clinic occupied a forgotten maintenance tunnel 40 meters beneath the district's neon-soaked streets, its walls lined with salvaged medical equipment and black-market surgical tools. Fluorescent strips cast harsh shadows across surfaces that may kept meticulously clean despite the location's inherent griminess. The air tasted of recycled oxygen and disinfectant, a combination that had become her signature perfume after years of hiding from corporate medical oversight. Koji had arrived 3 hours ago, stumbling through her reinforced door with blood streaming from his ears and a wild look in his augmented eyes. His street-modded combat implant, a cheap Korean knockoff that should have given him enhanced reflexes and tactical awareness, had transformed into something unrecognizable. Where smooth titanium should have been, crystalline structures now grew like frost on a window, spreading from the implant's base along his skull in fractal patterns that defied conventional geometry. May adjusted her surgical loops and leaned closer, watching the transformation in real time. The metallic tendrils moved with purpose, weaving themselves through Koji's subcutaneous tissue with an intelligence that made her stomach clench. Each tendril measured less than a millimeter in diameter, but together they formed a network that reminded her of neural pathways, or perhaps the root system of some impossible plant. They pulsed with bioluminescent signals, creating a light show beneath his translucent skin that would have been beautiful if it weren't so terrifying. Her diagnostic scanner, a military-grade device she'd acquired through channels best left unmentioned, showed readings that made no sense. The tendrils registered as both organic and synthetic simultaneously, existing in a quantum state that her equipment couldn't properly categorize. Temperature readings fluctuated wildly, showing spots of extreme cold next to areas burning with fever. Most disturbing were the electromagnetic signatures. Koji's body was broadcasting on frequencies reserved for emergency services and military communications, sending out encrypted packets of data that her systems couldn't decode. She attempted her first extraction using microsurgical forceps, targeting a cluster of tendrils near the implant's primary interface port. The moment her instruments made contact, Koji's body convulsed with inhuman strength. His back arched off the table, muscles contracting so violently that she heard tendons snap. The tendrils themselves reacted like a disturbed hive, writhing and reorganizing into defensive formations that reminded her of microscopic footage she'd seen of white blood cells attacking an infection. The crystalline structures on his skull began to resonate, producing a sound that bypassed her ears entirely and seemed to vibrate directly in her bones. Her own basic medical implant, a simple diagnostic enhancer she'd installed years ago, suddenly blazed with heat. Error messages flooded her visual display, warning of attempted unauthorized access. She yanked the forceps away, stumbling backward as Koji's convulsions subsided into irregular twitching. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she considered her options. Traditional extraction was clearly impossible. The organism had integrated too deeply with Koji's nervous system. Attempting to remove it by force would likely kill him, if the defensive response didn't kill her. First, she needed to understand what she was dealing with before making another attempt. Her fingers flew across her workstation's holographic interface, pulling up every database she could access through the dark net. She cross-referenced the symptoms with known malware infections, biological pathogens, and even experimental military bioweapons. Nothing matched. The closest analogs were theoretical papers on synthetic biology and quantum computing, discussing the possibility of creating hybrid organisms that could exist simultaneously in biological and digital states. Koji's vitals stabilized somewhat as she administered a cocktail of neural inhibitors and immunosuppressants, buying time while she analyzed tissue samples under her electron microscope. What she saw defied her understanding of both biology and technology. The nanowire organism wasn't simply interfacing with Koji's cybernetics, it was consuming and reconstructing them at a molecular level. Silicon circuits transformed into organic semiconductors. Metal alloys reorganized into crystalline matrices that conducted both electricity and what appeared to be biological signals. The transformation followed patterns that suggested intelligence, perhaps even consciousness. The organism seemed to be learning from Koji's implant, understanding its functions and improving upon them. Where his combat software had provided basic threat assessment, the new crystalline structures appeared capable of processing information at quantum speeds. She detected photonic activity within the crystals, suggesting they were performing calculations using light itself. As she documented her observations, Koji's eyes snapped open. His pupils had been replaced by spiraling patterns of light that shifted between colors beyond normal human perception. He stared at her without recognition, his mouth moving in silent words that her lip-reading software couldn't interpret. The broadcasting intensified, and her equipment began picking up fragments of the transmission. Most of it remained encrypted, but she isolated repeating segments that appeared to be coordinates, pointing to locations deep beneath the city's foundation. She managed to stabilize his condition using a combination of electromagnetic shielding and targeted drug therapy, but she knew these were temporary measures. Whatever had infected Koji was beyond her ability to cure with conventional medicine. It represented something entirely new, a fusion of organic and digital existence that challenged everything she understood about the boundaries between life and technology. As dawn approached and Koji fell into an uneasy sleep, May stared at her notes with growing unease. This wasn't a disease or a malware infection. It was evolution, happening in real time, using human bodies as its laboratory. The implications terrified her more than any gang war or corporate crackdown she'd survived. She was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented, and she had no idea how to stop it. The 48 hours following Koji's arrival transformed May's hidden clinic into a nightmare of medical impossibilities. Where she typically treated 2 or 3 patients daily, now dozens crowded her narrow entrance tunnel, their bodies exhibiting grotesque variations of the same nanowire infection that had claimed Koji. The social diversity of the infected defied logic. Corporate executives in 1,000-credit suits stood alongside street vendors with obsolete implants, while augmented sex workers from the pleasure districts waited next to students carrying military-grade study enhancement chips. Each victim presented unique symptoms based on their cybernetic configurations. A corporate analyst named Harrison Chen had arrived with his executive-class neural processor, transforming into a crown of crystalline spikes that protruded through his scalp in perfect geometric patterns. The spikes hummed with data transmission, broadcasting quarterly reports and market analyses into frequencies normally reserved for satellite communications. His expensive implant's advanced architecture had given the parasite more complex materials to work with, resulting in structures that resembled microscopic cities built from living metal and organic semiconductors. A street food vendor, elderly woman Kim Soo-jin, carried only a basic translation implant to help with tourist customers. The infection had transformed this simple device into a sprawling web of filaments that spread across her face like silver veins, pulsing with bioluminescent signals that shifted between languages she'd never learned. The parasite had somehow accessed linguistic databases through her connection to the city's translation grid, downloading centuries of human communication into structures no larger than hair follicles. Most disturbing was Yuki, a pleasure district worker whose full-body sensory augmentation suite had become a canvas for the organism's creativity. Her skin rippled with waves of metallic transformation, creating patterns that responded to emotional stimuli from anyone nearby. The parasite had learned to interpret and broadcast human feelings as electromagnetic radiation, turning her into an unwilling empathic transmitter whose presence could trigger panic attacks or inexplicable euphoria in uninfected individuals. May worked without sleep, documenting each case with obsessive detail. Patterns emerged from the chaos. The parasite wasn't simply spreading randomly through the population. It followed the city's neural network infrastructure with mathematical precision. Infection clusters appeared along major data trunk lines, spreading outward from communication nodes and server facilities. The organism used human nervous systems as bridges between digital networks, treating consciousness itself as another form of bandwidth to be utilized. More fascinating was how the parasite learned and evolved with each new host. Early infections like Koji showed crude transformations, basic crystalline structures that seemed almost experimental, but each subsequent generation displayed increasing sophistication. The organism retained information from previous hosts, building upon their cybernetic architectures to create increasingly complex biological machines. Harrison's executive processor had taught it about quantum encryption, which it then applied to Kim's simple translator, creating linguistic algorithms that shouldn't have been possible with her hardware. The emergency surgery on Harrison provided May with her first real breakthrough. As she attempted to stabilize his condition using electromagnetic field manipulation, her equipment accidentally created a resonance frequency that temporarily cleared the parasite's transmissions. In that brief window of clarity, she intercepted fragments of the mysterious broadcast that all infected individuals seemed to be receiving and retransmitting. The data stream contained more than coordinates. It carried what appeared to be instructions written in a programming language that predated modern coding by decades. She recognized elements of COBOL and Fortran mixed with biological sequencing patterns, as if someone had tried to write DNA using computer code. The coordinates embedded within pointed to locations throughout the city's underground infrastructure, all converging on a point approximately 3 kilometers beneath the old financial district. Her analysis revealed that these locations corresponded to forgotten maintenance tunnels and abandoned server farms from the city's early expansion period, when corporations had first attempted to create a unified urban consciousness. The parasite wasn't randomly selecting these sites. It was following a map that had been embedded in the city's architecture for over 50 years, waiting for something to activate it. The infection pattern also showed disturbing intelligence in its victim selection. Each infected individual occupied a crucial position in the city's information ecosystem. Harrison processed financial data for 3 major corporations. Kim's translation implant connected her to tourist information networks. Yuki's sensory suite linked her to the pleasure district's emotional monitoring systems. The parasite was building a network of human nodes, each providing access to different aspects of the city's digital nervous system. As May worked to keep her patients stable, she noticed the infected beginning to synchronize. Their crystalline growths pulsed in unison, creating harmonics that made her equipment screens flicker and distort. When she sedated one patient, others would grow agitated, as if they could feel their companion's unconsciousness through their shared connection. The parasite was linking them into a collective, using their combined processing power for purposes she couldn't fathom. The sophistication jumped dramatically with each passing hour, where early infections had produced simple, antenna-like structures. Newer victims sprouted complex arrays that resembled organic circuit boards. The parasite had learned to optimize its transformations, creating biological components that surpassed their technological predecessors in efficiency and capability. It was engineering evolution in real time, using human bodies as both raw material and testing ground. Her makeshift isolation ward had become a laboratory for transformation. The infected didn't seem to be dying, but they were certainly no longer entirely human. Their vital signs showed impossible readings: heart rates that synchronized with data packet transmissions, brain waves that matched quantum processing patterns, body temperatures that fluctuated with network traffic density. They existed in a liminal space between organic life and digital existence, neither fully one nor the other. The revelation came as she compared tissue samples under maximum magnification. The nanowire organism wasn't destroying human cells. It was upgrading them. Each infected cell showed modifications at the genetic level, with DNA sequences rewritten to incorporate instructions for building biological circuits. The parasite was transforming humanity at the most fundamental level, creating a new form of life that could exist simultaneously in physical and digital reality. As the 48th hour approached, May stood surrounded by 24 infected patients, their synchronized breathing creating a rhythm that seemed to match the city's data flow. She realized with growing certainty that she wasn't dealing with a disease or an invasion. This was something far more profound, an evolutionary leap triggered by humanity's integration with technology, a transformation that had been waiting dormant in the city's infrastructure for decades, needing only the right catalyst to begin. The coordinates in the broadcast called to her, promising answers in the depths beneath the city. She knew she would have to go there to find the source of this transformation. But first, she had to ensure her patients survived long enough for her to understand what they were becoming. The maintenance hatch groaned as May pried it open, revealing a shaft that descended into absolute darkness. Beside her, Takeishi Ghost, Nakamura adjusted his modified vision implants, their mechanical irises dilating to capture every photon in the abandoned metro tunnel. Ghost had been her information broker for years, a paranoid genius who lived entirely off-grid, his body more machine than flesh after decades of self-modification. He was also the only person she trusted to accompany her into the depths beneath Neo-Tokyo's foundation. They descended through layers of forgotten infrastructure, each level revealing the city's archaeological history in reverse. Modern fiber optic cables gave way to ancient copper wiring, which in turn revealed vacuum tube arrays from the earliest days of electronic communication. The air grew thick with the smell of rust and decay, punctuated by an underlying sweetness that reminded May of overheating processors. Her radiation detector clicked sporadically, detecting isotopes from nuclear batteries that had powered these tunnels decades ago. 300 meters down, the architecture changed dramatically. The utilitarian maintenance tunnels transformed into something that resembled a fusion of organic architecture and brutalist design. Walls curved like the inside of a throat, their surfaces covered in what appeared to be fossilized neural tissue that had somehow merged with concrete and steel. Bioluminescent fungi grew in patterns that mirrored circuit boards, their mycelia threading through the structure like living wires. Ghost's equipment detected the frequency before they heard it, a deep thrumming that registered just below human hearing, but made their bones ache with resonance. The same frequency that pulsed through every infected patient in May's clinic originated here, broadcasting from something massive ahead. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the tunnel, each sound seeming to trigger responses from the walls themselves, as if the structure was listening. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber that defied architectural logic. The space stretched impossibly far, its dimensions seeming to shift when observed directly. At its center stood a structure that made May's mind struggle to process what she was seeing. It rose 40 meters high, a fusion of organic neural tissue and ancient server architecture that pulsed with life despite its apparent age. Massive cables, thick as tree trunks and covered in what looked like bark made of crystallized proteins, connected it to the walls, ceiling, and floor. The server organism breathed. There was no other word for the rhythmic expansion and contraction of its biomechanical mass. With each breath, waves of data flickered across its surface in patterns identical to those she'd observed in her infected patients. The Crystalline growths that sprouted from its frame matched exactly the structures emerging from human hosts above. This wasn't just the source of the infection. It was the prototype, the original fusion of biological and digital systems. Ghost scanning equipment went haywire as they approached, displaying readings that shouldn't exist. The structure showed quantum entanglement signatures connecting it to every infected individual in the city above. It was simultaneously here and distributed across thousands of human nervous systems, existing in a superposition that violated conventional physics. The ancient servers still functioned, running code that predated modern programming languages, while the organic components showed cellular activity despite their obvious age. Scattered around the chamber's periphery lay evidence of the structure's origins. May found corporate logos etched into equipment panels. Yamamoto Synth Corporation, a biotech giant that had disappeared in a scandal 50 years ago. Deteriorating documents sealed in protective cases revealed fragments of Project Synthesis, an ambitious attempt to create a city-wide consciousness by networking human brains through their implants. The project had aimed to solve urban planning through collective intelligence, allowing the city to think for itself through its inhabitants. The documents revealed the project's catastrophic failure. Early test subjects had experienced complete neural collapse as their brains were overwhelmed by the collective data flow. The corporation had abandoned the facility, sealing it beneath layers of concrete and bureaucracy. But they hadn't destroyed their creation. The server organism had survived, learning, evolving, waiting. The neural tissue, cultivated from volunteer donors who believed they were contributing to medical research, had continued growing, fed by the city's electromagnetic radiation and the trace nutrients in groundwater. May discovered the most crucial piece of information in a partially corrupted data log. The organism hadn't spontaneously begun infecting people. Someone had reactivated it 3 weeks ago, sending a wake-up signal through obsolete emergency broadcast channels. The infection wasn't random evolution, but the completion of an abandoned experiment. The parasite was trying to finish what Yamamoto Synth had started, creating the networked consciousness that had been its original purpose. As she processed this revelation, the chamber filled with new arrivals. Corporate security forces in full tactical gear repelled from hidden access points, their weapons trained on the central structure. From another entrance came infected gang members, their crystalline modifications glowing with aggressive bioluminescence. Both groups moved with purpose, drawn by the same signal that had led May here. The corporations wanted to destroy evidence of their predecessors' crimes, while the infected sought to protect what they instinctively recognized. As their progenitor, the confrontation erupted in violence that transcended physical combat. The infected didn't just fight, they broadcast. Their crystalline modifications released electromagnetic pulses that overloaded the security forces' equipment. Some corporate soldiers began showing early infection symptoms within minutes, their own implants betraying them as the parasite spread through electronic warfare. The chamber became a battlefield where bullets mixed with data streams, where biological weapons merged with computer viruses. May found herself at the center of an impossible choice. The corporate forces carried thermite charges capable of destroying the entire structure, which would sever the parasite's connection to its hosts. Every infected person in the city would die as their transformed nervous systems collapsed without the central frequency to sustain them. But allowing the parasite to complete its work meant accepting the transformation of humanity into a single, networked organism, the death of individual consciousness as humans knew it. Standing before the breathing server organism, she realized there was a third option. Her medical equipment could interface with the structure's biological components, while ghost systems could access its digital architecture. Together, they could reprogram the broadcast, changing its fundamental instructions. Instead of forcing collective consciousness, they could modify the signal to give infected individuals control over their transformation. The parasite would become symbiotic rather than dominant, offering enhanced capabilities while preserving human autonomy. Ghost's fingers flew across his holographic interfaces as May injected modified retroviruses into the organism's neural tissue. They worked in desperate synchronization while the battle raged around them, rewriting 50 years of abandoned code and evolutionary adaptation. The structure resisted at first, its defensive systems attacking their modifications. But gradually, they found harmony between their changes and its existing patterns, creating something new from the fusion of old ambitions and modern understanding. The transformation rippled outward from the chamber as their reprogramming took hold. The infected gang members stopped fighting, their eyes clearing as they gained conscious control over their modifications for the first time. Corporate soldiers lowered their weapons in confusion as their infected squadmates didn't collapse, but instead stood straighter, more aware. Throughout the city above, thousands of infected individuals experienced the same awakening, suddenly able to choose their level of connection to the network rather than being consumed by it. The server organism's breathing changed, becoming less desperate and more rhythmic. It no longer sought to absorb and control, but to support and enhance. The crystalline structures on the infected began to reorganize, becoming tools rather than parasites. Some chose to maintain their connection, exploring the enhanced capabilities the transformation offered. Others opted for minimal integration, keeping only beneficial modifications while rejecting the collective aspects. May watched as humanity's next evolutionary step began not through force or invasion but through choice. The abandoned experiment had become an opportunity for conscious transformation, a chance for humans to decide their own relationship with the technology that had become inseparable from their existence. The underground frequency continued to pulse, but now it carried a different message. Not submission but symbiosis, not uniformity but diversity in connection. As corporate forces retreated and infected individuals began exploring their new capabilities, May understood that she had witnessed and shaped a pivotal moment. The city would never be the same. Humanity would never be the same. But perhaps that had always been inevitable from the moment they first merged. Flesh with silicon, thought with code. The parasite had simply accelerated a transformation that was already underway, and she had helped ensure it remained human at its core.